Welcome back. So let's keep reading Hegel, and we are still in the preface on scientific cognition. We have talked about paragraph 1. I will summarize it very briefly. He says, well, what does a preface usually do? Well, it introduces us to the general goals and tells us the history that has preceded this particular book, and it compares like different scientific work. But he says this is actually superfluous for a philosophical work because philosophical work is not so much interested in the result. It is also interested in the result, but it is interested in the whole, which also includes the process. Like a proof, for example, gives you a conclusion in the end. You are not interested in the simple conclusion. You're also interested in the premises that have led to that kind of conclusion. And this is how he seems to determine philosophy, and which also constitutes the standpoint of science. Now, keep in mind that we want to achieve that kind of standpoint of science. Now, let's go to the second paragraph. You can read with me along in your book, so you can take notes and so on. And maybe it helps you to get access to this really difficult work, which I regard as one of the most difficult works in philosophy. Furthermore, the very attempt to define how a philosophical work is supposed to be connected with other efforts to deal with the same subject matter drags in an extraneous concern, and what is really important for the cognition of the truth is obscured. So I think what he says here, if one makes extended reference to other sources, then the actual truth is, as he expresses it, obscured. It means we are somehow forgetting what is actually the matter that we want to do. And we have that very often in philosophical seminars, that students come and you try to discuss a particular issue and they say, well, but what would Kant say about it or Schopenhauer about it? And I think this is stupid. Yeah, no, first you have to deal with the work at hand. And what is mostly a problem is, can they reconstruct the sentences in their own words without making extra references to other philosophers, while these references may be wrong? And most of the time they are kind of wrong. Yeah. So we try to stay to the text as closely as possible. The more conventional opinion gets fixated on the antithesis of truth and falsity, the more it tends to expect a given philosophical system to be either accepted or contradicted, and hence it finds only acceptance or rejection. Okay, so contrary to what I've said before, I make like a larger reference to the history of philosophy here because I think it will be helpful to understand what he's saying here. So very often people perceive philosophical theories in terms of true or false. That's what he's saying in the sentence, right? And they say, oh, Hegel's system is false, but Kant's system was true. Or I don't like Kant, therefore analytic philosophy is right. Or continental philosophy is right. But I think what Hegel says, if we do philosophy from a scientific standpoint, of course we are going to say false sentences or sentences that will turn out to be false, but it's not that our overall method is false or that our overall philosophy is false, as long, and I think this is also what he wants to express, we are genuine with regard to doing philosophy. So therefore, when we usually tend to discuss it from a historical perspective, we start comparing it in terms of truth and falsity, and this actually distracts us again. So this position, when we especially look at the history, does not comprehend the diversity of philosophical systems as the progressive unfolding of truth, but rather sees in it simple disagreements. Yeah, so we say, well, Kant disagreed with Wolff, and now Hegel disagrees with Kant. And so we discuss like this kind of historical story, but we are not discussing the system anymore. And we start focusing on disagreements, while the progressive unfolding of truth is what we really want to understand. And Hegel sees here all philosophers or genuine philosophers working together, expressing truth, even in contradictory opinions. And this is now expressed by a metaphor that he likes to use. And I really recommend you to keep this metaphor in mind whenever you read Hegel, because it will really explain a lot for his dialectics. So the bud disappears in the bursting forth of the blossom, and one might say that the former is refuted by the latter. So we have like a plant, right? And it has a bud, and then it bursts forth into the blossom. And we say, well, obviously, the bud was wrong, and the blossom is the truth. But then what happens? And one might say the former is refuted by the latter. Okay, similarly, when the fruit appears, the blossom is shown up in its turn as a false manifestation of the plant. And the fruit now emerges as the truth of it instead. So what he wants to say, what is a plant? Well, a plant is not just simply a single state in which it is in. It's more the whole of the plant. And then, of course, what are the limits of the plant? So somehow everything is connected to a larger whole. There is no single instantiation of something that is true. So therefore, we also already have a little bit of a foreshadowing. It's not a representationalist theory. That's why inferentialists like Sellers or Brandom like Hegel so much. These forms are not just distinguished from one another, they also supplant one another as mutually incompatible. So, okay, we have the single forms, right? The bud, the blossom, and then the fruit. And they are somehow distinct from each other and they are mutually incompatible. And then he says, yet at the same time, their fluid nature makes them moments of an organic unity in which they not only do not conflict, but in which each is as necessary as the other. And this mutual necessity alone constitutes the life of the whole. So we have here the idea of a fluid nature. We have here, and I mean, these are pretty important terms, so I mark them just for myself. We have organic nature. Before we had the bud and the blossom and the fruit, right? So these are like central ideas here. The life of the whole, that may also be important. So yeah, I think I don't have to say much in terms of explaining this anymore. I just want to reflect a little bit on that. So Hegel introduces the idea of a fluid nature, very Heraclitean. So the truth is the constant transformation. And then we have the idea of an organic unity that was very prevalent in the 19th century, that we try to explain everything as organic. Well, one might debate whether that is true or not, whether we can, for example, express states as large organic unities that function like animals. I don't think that works, but back then there was a common way of trying to understand the phenomena that surround us. And what is also very important here is that he says that all of these moments are necessary. So what that means is when we, for example, have a philosophy that contradicts in its particular form the philosophy that comes after, does not mean that it was false entirely in terms of a representationalist theory. It was necessary to achieve the truth, right? But he who rejects a philosophical system, the new philosopher, so now we have the new philosopher, that is the one who says, well, all people before, they were wrong, but I have a new system, and he rejects all these kind of systems, right? He does not usually comprehend what he's doing in this way. And he's not understanding that he's just part of a larger historical process, right? And he who grasped the contradiction between them, now we have the historian of philosophy, does not, as a general rule, know how to free it from its one-sidedness. So also the historian who looks from the outside at the history of philosophy, he's also one-sided because he does not really get into the current philosophical spirit of really experiencing philosophy, or maintain it in its freedom by recognizing the reciprocally, I don't know how you English do that. I say it in German. Die reziproken necessary moments that take shape as a conflict and seeming incompatibility. So there's an idea of freedom here, which is kind of interesting. I don't really know how to interpret it entirely, but he says again, like he does not know how to allow the structure to come forth with regard to its necessary moment. So what a historian very often says is like, and in 1781, Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, and then it was published with a second preface in 1785. And when he was writing that, he was reading a letter of this guy. And they actually tell you a lot of historical facts, and they don't tell you what it is actually about. This also, we are writing a book right now about the history of Western civilization. And there we also try to focus on telling a story that lets the elements of philosophy become alive, right? Not just like saying, and then he was born this, and then we had this idea, and then this. That's how many books are written, and I'm very disappointed. So therefore, we are writing our own book on this issue. Yeah, however, there was a little bit of self-advertisement. I hope this helped you reading this. Again, like the metaphor of the plant is very helpful for understanding Hegel. Just memorize that if you want to become a Hegelian, which is not the worst kind of philosopher to become. And yeah, please let me know in the comments whether that was helpful. Subscribe if you want to follow more. I cannot promise that I do this very regularly, but my overall life goal is to read this way through the whole phenomenology of spirit. And yeah, if you want to follow me on that path, then just subscribe one of my channels. Thank you and goodbye. Live long, read more Hegel, and prosper.